Elliot Williams is a CNN legal analyst and the author of the new book, 5 Bullets, A Story of Bernie Goetz, New York's explosive 80s and the subway vigilante trial that divided the nation. I want to talk to him about that, and I want to talk to him about what's happening in this world of ICE and Minnesota and all of that. And how did he decide to write a book on Bernie Goetz? You're showing your age by doing that, but
show my age by the fact that I look like a cadaver when I don't have TV makeup on. That's how I show my age, Don. But
come on, no TV makeup here, sir. No. Huh?
There's an expression for that. It's independent journalists don't crack. So that might be what people are seeing.
Thank you. We'll talk about your book in just a moment, which I'm really thrilled to talk about, and congratulations on that. And it's good to see you. What is going on with ICE? And tell us, because you have obviously a history with ICE. Were you the former executive director?
Assistant director. So I was, one of a bunch of folks helping to run the agency. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what is happening with ICE? Is this the ICE that you work for?
Yeah, that's such a complicated question, Don, because ICE is always going to be radioactive. Just the very nature of immigration enforcement really is troubling to many people. And, it's within the world of law enforcement, it's a particularly tough place right now. Even when I was there, ICE was controversial. And I remember for the first 2 years that I was there, Democrats controlled both houses of Congress, and they were the biggest critics of ICE and even critics of Obama's ICE. You've heard about the term deporter in chief and, going after meatpacking plants and so on, which changed over the years that I was there. So yes, ICE has always been controversial and radioactive. That said, my friend, this is not what I remember, and it certainly is not the way it was carried out, both in terms of the level of transparency that ICE has, like a window into what exactly are they doing, number one. And number two, just the math, Don, just do the math. The president was clear, and God bless him for it. He told America what he was going to do on immigration enforcement and said, we want to have the most robust deportation effort in history. We're going to remove 1 million people from the country. Okay, fine. If he wants to do that, that's a political choice that he's free to make and his supporters are free to make. But you can't take an entity that was doing 300,000 of a thing and then move it up to 1 million of a thing and then expect that everything's going to be okay. They necessarily were going to start violating civil rights or hiring people who were not fit for the job or acting in a way far exceeding their authority. Just do the math. And my question to everyone is, well, what did you expect? What did you think when you had the president talking the way he was about immigration before on the campaign trail? What did anyone expect? And I don't think anyone should be shocked by what they're seeing right now.
You really, the cruelty of it? You don't think people should be shocked?
I don't think people recognize what it truly meant to, and I've been saying it for a long time, and you got a problem when someone who worked for ICE under Obama is saying, whoa, slow down, folks. No, I just think when the president was that forthright about what they were planning on doing, when Stephen Miller was talking about 3,000 arrests a day, I think were the numbers. That is a staggering number in the history of American law enforcement. And, yes, the president has his critics, always has had his critics, and his critics were saying, guys, red flag, this is going to be really bad. But I actually think there were Trump adjacent or Trump curious people who did not really stop to think about what the kind of immigration enforcement he was talking about really was going to mean. And it was going to mean, like I said, the sort of lowering the hiring standards and then just literally sweeping people up, because you just can't find that volume of people who are unlawfully present in the country without that kind of hyper aggressive and in many instances just impermissible and sloppy law enforcement.
So, Elliot, when you look at what's happening just around the country, just as a human being, not as someone who worked for ICE and not, as a political analyst or any of that, let me just show you some of it first. This is a baby who was tear gassed, and then also a man whose rights were violated when they busted into his home with a battering ram. And I just want to get what you think, your thoughts on this.
We're learning more about another dangerous incident involving ICE. A family says 3 of their children, including a 6-month-old, were hospitalized after agents reportedly fired tear gas at their vehicle. Destiny Jackson says they were on their way home from a basketball game when gas grenades set off the airbags, trapping them inside as gas filled the car. After people nearby helped open the doors, she says they realized their infant had stopped breathing. Destiny says she had to perform CPR to revive her own child.
Me getting my baby, having to get my baby like mouth to mouth, I thought I was dying, honestly. And the way I felt, I could imagine how my kids felt, because I'm a full-blown grown adult. I just knew that it was even worse for them.
And late Thursday night, a federal judge in Minnesota ordered the release of a Liberian man 4 days after heavily armed agents were seen using a battering ram to enter his home. The judge said in his ruling that his Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful search and seizure were violated. Garrison Gibson was in his home with his wife and 9-year-old daughter when he was arrested. He's being held at an immigration center, according to the Associated Press.
So, Elliot, when you see that and the trauma and the pain that caused, this is a human being. What do you think?
It's a few things. I think the human cost, again, sort of as I was saying a little bit earlier, I just don't think people who maybe were swing voters who were skeptical of the president, but still, not happy with the direction the country was going under Joe Biden. I don't think people really thought about what was coming. So that's point one. Point two, it's the power of the cell phone image, and this generation, if the administration is not being fully transparent about how they are carrying out any sorts of law enforcement, particularly immigration enforcement. We just live in a time of people documenting everything. And I think to some extent, that is what is highlighting a lot of some of what appear to be some pretty grave abuses by the administration with respect to immigration enforcement. That's 1, 2. And then finally, point 3, a lot of this comes down to accountability, like when a presidential administration or when any entity, law enforcement entity, steps outside the bounds of what it's allowed to do, how do you hold them accountable? And really that way is Congress. The way our country has been set up since its founding is that, when an administration's either abusing a power, exceeding power, or even using its power lawfully, but in a way that Congress doesn't want, Congress ought to be the one having hearings. Congress ought to be the one asking the questions, and they're just not doing it. I use the example from my time back in ICE. I was an appointee under a Democratic administration working for ICE, but it was Democrats in Congress for those first 2 years that were the most aggressive about raising concerns and even threatening to suspend the funding of the agency until some of these questions they had were answered. You're really not seeing that right now. I mean, there was a moment with respect to Jeffrey Epstein in which Congress sort of in a bipartisan manner raised some questions to the administration about how to proceed. There was a moment around Venezuela where some Senate Republicans seemed to break with the president, but for the most part, Congress, which ought to be, if not a co-equal branch of government, the first among equals, they just haven't been playing that role. And it will be truly fascinating, I think, on a historic level, on a human level, whatever level, to see, should Democrats take a House of Congress in 2026, in the midterms, how this dynamic changes, if at all.
But if there is a 2026, considering what you see here, let's talk about the training of those alleged agents. We call them goons here on the Don Lemon Show. Let's talk about the training, or the lack of training, because it reportedly they got 47 days of training, and they're supposed to get 5 months of training, and it appears that they're just hiring people off the streets without qualifications. That is, I would hope that is new and that is reversible. But did that happen during the Obama administration?
No. I mean, certainly the qualifications for immigration officers were in some ways lower than the qualifications for customs officers, the other side of the ICE house, which I'll be perfectly candid. For the time I was there, and just since the founding of the agency, the customs folks don't want to be a part of this agency, or at least for some time didn't, because they never wanted to be smushed with this immigration work that they regard as really radioactive. And in fact, a few years ago in 2018, the customs side of the House, many of the leaders wrote a letter to the secretary asking to be broken off into a separate agency. They just think the immigration stuff is so toxic and so radioactive and bad for them as law enforcement officers. Now, the folks who, when I say they were lower standards, they didn't have the same educational standards as customs officers and were officers, not agents, and it gets a little bit complicated. Now, when this administration has tried to surge hiring, they've certainly had to bend the standards even for the deportation officers, and raising age limits and so on. And I think it comes at a profound cost. It really does. This work is difficult. You want people to be in shape for it at a minimum. And I just think you're just not finding that. Yeah.
So let me ask you, look, obviously, you need to pay the bills, but why do people take these jobs like this with this type of, when this is their mission?
Well, let me ask you.
These are the marching orders they're getting.
Define these jobs. When you say these jobs, what do you mean?
I mean, the people who are rounding people up off the street without due process and dragging them through the snow and pulling them out of cars and cutting their seatbelts and breaking their windows and battering rams into their homes, tear gassing babies. Like, who wants that job?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think an interesting segment on the Don Lemon Show would be to talk to an actual deportation officer. I think, look, let's put it this way. I worked for years with Tom Homan, who's now the White House border czar. And, a lot of law enforcement folks just see themselves as holding the line between freedom and tyranny, right? That's just that's their ethos and worldview. And, you might be seeing some of that. I think a lot of folks in law enforcement come from the military, and in the military, the thing that is paramount is following orders, and the order that has come quite clearly from the top, if not the president and certainly the folks around him, is this is what your job is. And I think it has led to some of the abuses, the kinds of things that you're talking about and seeing there. But at its core, and I want to be clear, Don, at its core, law enforcement is a good thing at its core. No nation in the world exists without some sort of immigration or border enforcement apparatus. The way we've done it here in this country has completely run amok, and you're seeing now in these images what the dark side of that is. And more than anything else, I'll get back to the point I made. Congress let this happen. They didn't, the laws have been vague. They need to be updated, and they haven't held this administration accountable in the way that just, you have one fucking job, do your job.
Yeah, you can't say that word on the CNN, can you? So, look, that's not going to help the approval rating of Congress, especially if I guess people realize now that this is lawmakers' fault. That's how they feel. But look, there's a very similar thing. There is a direct connection to your book, because much like this, there are people who are hailing these immigration agents or officers who are, wreaking havoc on the people of Minnesota and elsewhere, and others who are saying, obviously the majority of Americans are saying this is awful, this is tyrannical, they shouldn't be doing it. Same thing with Bernie Goetz. People were wondering, should he get a medal or should he spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement, so to speak? So there's a direct connection between here and since the 1980s.
Yeah, nothing is more of a Rorschach test than law enforcement, but also vigilantes, and what we as a country think about people who step outside the law because they feel that law enforcement isn't doing its job. And there's a long tradition. In the book, 5 Bullets, I talk about not just Bernie Goetz, but Daniel Penny, who was the ex-Marine college student who choked Jordan Neely, the Michael Jackson impersonator, to death, and Kyle Rittenhouse, and believe it or not, Luigi Mangione, who also felt that the systems in the country were not acting in an appropriate manner. Therefore, he had to take the law into his own hands. And all of these folks were heralded by a major, if not majority, portion of the public. What is that about? And what I say, a thread running through 5 Bullets is 2 of the most motivating influences in American history have been fear. And we as humans are united in our fear, but also a fixation or fetish or fantasy or whatever else about vigilantes. And all of these guys were lifted up on account of sort of doing what people didn't feel like they could do on their own.
You probably did, you're not old enough to remember, but I lived through Bernie Goetz. I remember the Bernie Goetz. I remember the subway vigilante. There
Yeah.
have been lots of Law and Order episodes that were based around
Uh-huh.
what Daniel Penny, excuse me, not Daniel
Yeah.
Penny, what Bernie Goetz did there. Um, you're right. It was the advent. I think in your book you talk about it being the advent of cable happening with cable news. So
Yeah.
a lot of things came together. What was the impetus? Why did you write this? Is it because of what is happening in the country now? Was
Yeah.
that your
Yeah.
motivation or your inspiration?
I would say chicken and egg, and that's a wonderful question, Don. So a couple things. One, again, despite this youthful mien that I might have, I was 8, younger than you, but I was 8 when it happened, and I would urge everybody to think about the formative news stories of your childhood. They really stick in your brain, and the Bernie Goetz story was probably one of the first big local, but not local, because even though I lived out, this is Brooklyn, my t-shirt, Brooklyn Nets hoodie I'm wearing now. But even though, I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in New Jersey, and it was local news for us, but it was a national story and one of the first really big, really polarizing ones I remember. And it was formative for me in terms of how to see the news, how to see media bias, how to see public safety, and so on. So there's always been a personal connection to it, one. And I think, two, to your point, a lot of these issues we're still living with today. This whole idea of full stop, does the media make you feel scared? Mm-hmm. Yes. The answer is yes. And that's something that people feel today quite viscerally. Does the country celebrate and lift up vigilantes, often white guys, for doing the things they do? And the answer is yes. Are there biases, whether implicit or explicit, that we all hold, but particularly that lead people to commit violent acts, and particularly often violent acts against people that don't look like them? And the answer also is yes. And so using the sort of modern day examples that you talk about there, I do get into quite a bit of that in 5 bullets, that, past is present. And a lot of these issues that the country grappled with in 1984 really aren't resolved today, and certainly are if not front of mind, certainly lingering in all of our brains.
Support for the show comes from One Skin. Can we talk about New Year's resolutions for a second? January used to be about reinventing everything. Now, for me, it's about doing an honest audit of what's actually working and doubling down on that. One thing I've gotten serious about, and that is my skin health. That's where One Skin comes in. What I use is their daily skincare with OS1 peptide. I like it because it's not just about how your skin looks today. It's about long-term skin health at a cellular level. Their patented OS1 peptide is the first ingredient proven to target senescent cells, which are a root cause of wrinkles, loss of elasticity, and crepey skin. And this isn't hype. The results have been validated in 4 clinical studies. One Skin products are dermatologist tested. They're safe for sensitive skin and free from over 1,500 harsh ingredients. They even earned the National Eczema Association seal of acceptance. Right now, you can get up to 30% off of your first 3 subscription orders when you use the code DON at oneskin.co/Don. That's oneskin.co/Don. And after you purchase, please tell them that we sent you. It really helps the show. The Don Lemon Show today is brought to you by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Now, I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it. Equality under the law only works when the government stays neutral. The First Amendment wasn't written to protect one religion. It was written to protect all of us. Right now, that promise is under threat from Christian nationalists who believe their beliefs should control everyone's lives, whether you share those beliefs or not. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is pushing back. They're defending students, families, and communities from religious coercion, and they're standing up for the wall between church and state. If you believe freedom means freedom for everyone, this work matters. Visit ffrf.us/New Year or text DON to 511-511. That's DON to 511. ffrf.us/New Year or DON to 511-511. Text fees may apply. You said it's a Rorschach test, but what's interesting to me is that, I'm wondering if back then the question was, were they really trying to rob him? They say they weren't. He said that they were. They said they were asking him for $5 or whatever. Did it really matter, or did people see this as the issues that they were having overall with the country, and this, whatever it was, whether you thought that this country's racist or whatever, and you would say, of course that's going to happen. Your beliefs are reconfirmed. If
Yeah.
you think that, oh, these kids they're terrorizing us, the blacks or whatever, then your beliefs are reconfirmed. Did it even matter at the end of the day whether he's guilty, whether he's not guilty, whether they tried to rob him or not rob him? People are just going to have their beliefs reconfirmed?
Yeah, so it's impossible to judge the story without talking about what New York City was like in the 1980s. It wasn't Labradoodle and Lululemon New York City. It was
Times Square, right?
It was not. It was Times Square. Square, where you went for your peep shows or some cocaine. It was a homicide rate that flirted with 2,000 homicides a year, which is literally more than today by a factor of 4. It was rough. It was gritty. The subways were covered in graffiti. Crack epidemic, HIV, with a closeted mayor who did not want to confront HIV as an issue because he thought, and I talk about this. I talk about this in the book 5 Bullets. Ed Koch was in the closet and did not want to be outspoken on the rise of AIDS because he thought it would come back to fire. So New York City was just, there was, the blackout of 77 that turned into a giant riot and the purge. Everything was just really rough. And many people saw in Bernhard Goetz this hero who was sort of fixing the forces of disorder that were really bringing the city down. But, to many, certainly to black politicians and many white columnists, the big one being Jimmy Breslin at the Daily News, saw the racial dynamics of the case as unmistakable. No one, and I would challenge everybody to think this, like, of any story, just flip the races of the participants. And if a black man had left 4 white teenagers bleeding out in a subway, fled to New Hampshire and hid, then turned himself in and come back, gone on trial and been acquitted, like, there would be Armageddon around that story. And I just think, nobody's calling you racist for saying that. It's just, it is a reality of just how we all see polarizing issues of criminal justice. The racial dynamics are just unmistakable. And I make that clear throughout the book.
So then where are we now with this? What is this? If I read this, what will it do for me? Well, what's the satisfaction? Is it just sort of a fascinating looking back, or is there some sort of solution? I hate the word closure.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. No. Well, one, it's a far more enjoyable story than I would have thought, just sort of to read and relive, sort of getting in the minds of,
because it's about Bernie Goetz, but it's not really. It's not
right. That's what Freud would say, right? Sometimes a story about a subway vigilante isn't a story about a subway vigilante. Right. It's about sort of America and sort of the biases we hold, but also just issues that we grapple with today. I would say that people will come away knowing that the people, places, and things that we thought we knew and that we caricatured are not as simple as we might have thought. Like Bernhard Goetz, whom I interviewed for the book, as the New Yorker said in their review of it, they said that he does not come off sympathetically in my interview, but at least comes out as 3-dimensional. And I sort of talk through like what's in this guy's head. It's all over the place. But what, Bernhard Goetz is just far more complex than I would have thought from anything I'd read as a kid. These young men who were reduced to just criminal histories at the time were far more complex beings with needs and wants and desires and fears than the world would have wanted to let on. And I think New York City, in all of its flaws in the 1980s, was far more complex than people maybe would have given it credit for. And I just think the book is an entertaining and engaging look into complexity of the lives we all live through a story that we thought we knew really well.
1984 was a very pivotal year for me. It was a year I graduated high school, and I was a freshman in college when this happened. By the time this happened in December, I'm wondering what 1984 New York would think of 2026 New York when you go from Ed Koch. They would know about, obviously, 1984 New York would know about what's his name, Giuliani.
Oh, Giuliani.
Yeah, he would know about. They would know about Giuliani. Would know about 9/11. But I'm wondering what it would think about, what 1984 New York would think about.
Yeah.
New York. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think wait a second. Al Sharpton only weighs 155 pounds now and wears suits all the time. What?
Right.
He cut off the conch and he's sort of a cable television host.
Most people don't know what conks mean, meaning
Oh, sorry.
the,
Oh, sorry. I thought on the Don Lemon
the
show.
relaxed, straightened hair, but go on.
I thought the Don Lemon show viewers would know about congelone, but no, it's a
They would know.
relaxed,
They know. They know. I mean, they learned about it in Malcolm X if they didn't.
Right,
you know,
exactly. So wait, so Al Sharpton, who's a central figure in the book. Wait a second. The National Rifle Association, which is a sporting and hunting organization, now is centrally focused on Second Amendment advocacy. Wait a second. What? Wait, Donald Trump is president? That guy who's the real estate, so all of these things. I mean, what's interesting about where I go in the book, 5 Bullets.
Wait, hold that thought. Can you imagine if you ask 1984 New York if Donald Trump would be president, they'd be like, "That are you kidding me?"
Well, it's not even. I mean, it's just he was certainly a success and a successful businessman and model to many people, but he's sort of a playboy and just man about town. When we think about, just look at who the presidents were up until that point. All America knew could be president was Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Right. These are not colorful figures, even under the best of circumstances. So the idea of the celebrity president was a new concept, right? And I just think something people weren't quite ready for, or would not be quite ready for. How many of the national figures that come out of New York City politics are and were of New York City? Just think about at that time, 84, young Chuck Schumer. He's 6 years into being in the House of Representatives. Al Sharpton, Michael Bloomberg. Wait, that guy who's an investment banker who's sort of creating these little computer boxes, he's going to end up being mayor and running and a billionaire and all kinds. And just think about how many national figures just emerge from the crucible of 1980s New York City politics. Yeah. And then much of, I feel like other than the characters, the human characters in the book, the grit and grime and disorder of 80s New York is a central figure in my book. And I think people saying, wait a second, the subway is going to be this glassy space age place without graffiti and homicide happening on it, where people aren't littering and urinating all the time. Wait a second, there are going to be skyscrapers all around Central Park that stretch to the heavens and are all made of glass. And, you don't walk through Washington Square Park or Morningside Park and crunching on crack pipes everywhere you go. People just would be mind blown by what New York has become for reasons good and bad. I mean, a lot of the character that made the city, take out the safety because everybody wants to feel safe. But a lot of that character, has been, for lack of a better term, sacrificed for like I said, the labradoodleness of New York City. And it's just a different place. Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of the neighborhoods, I live in the Village, and it's like a lot of, sort of trust fund kids that, most people can't even afford to live in the Village anymore. Normal people, that affordability thing is a huge, huge issue. It's a real issue that I think Mamdani tapped into. Kamala Harris tapped into it in her campaign as well, but not as much, but yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to leave the impression that it's a hyper-local story just about New York. There's a reason why one of the verses in We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel is AIDS crack Bernie Goetz, because these were literally the enduring sort of forces driving a lot of America and sort of what American fear and American trauma was in the 1980s, a lot of which we are still grappling with today. And yes, it starts in the city and is of the city, but this is a broader look at who we are as Americans and the country we live in. So Bernie Goetz is still alive. He is. And the 4 men are still alive, although one was paralyzed, I believe, right? And has brain damage. Is that correct? Yeah. 2 alive, 2 dead. Okay. Two who have died over the years. One is brain damaged and paralyzed, and one is the only one who seems to have sort of stepped away from it all. A couple of arrests in the 1990s, but as I understand, is an auto mechanic outside of the city now, and just sort of doesn't look back on that past life. Bernie Goetz was found not guilty. Bernie Goetz found not guilty. Yeah, he's found not guilty. And what is he doing now? So it's funny. I sent him an email when the book was about to come out. I sent him an email saying, the one question I didn't ask you is, what are you doing? Like, what fills your days? And he said, I just, like most people, I'm just trying to live my life. And that's not okay. I understand. So he was a very successful engineer and very bright, sort of brilliant, all over the place, but cognitively sharp. And he was an engineer for a long time. I understand that he now does work in engineering, but he's 78 years old. He's getting up there. But he's also just around in New York City. He ran for mayor and public advocate on a pro-vegetarian meals in schools and an anti-circumcision platform, which, the interesting way to win the hearts and minds of voters. But yeah, he's just around, sort of fascinating figure.
Thank you, Elliot Williams. The book is called 5 Bullets, the story of Bernie Goetz, New York's explosive 80s, and the subway vigilante trial that divided the nation. And I encourage everyone to buy it. It's good to see you. It's good to talk to you.
Oh, so great to see you. So great to see your face, my friend.
Thank you. You as well. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a show. We're live every weekday at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time with new clips dropping at 2 p. and 8 p. And if you want even more Don Lemon Show content, join the Lemon community. Members get exclusive posts, behind-the-scenes videos, and live chats just for you. So hit the join button or visit our channel page to sign up. Thanks again for all your love and your support, and I'll see you next time.